Very quickly, we're moving to the next one. Lucy Lang, who's the head of Global Regulatory Affairs at the Complementary Medicines Australia. In the last year, we've done some interesting work together with CMA, and because there was some requirement to outreach to the TGA. TGA has taken quite an interest in probiotics in the last year, where, together with CMA, IPA has led some of the commentaries that we've put forth to the TGA, and we've proposed an outreach workshop with TGA in 2022. Well, we're waiting to hear back from them. So the next presentation is Lucy Lang from CMA in Australia. Obviously, she couldn't travel with us, so we had to ask her for virtual.
My name is Lucy Lang. I'm the Head of Regulatory Affairs for Complementary Medicines Australia, and I'm here to discuss current regulatory affairs for probiotics in Australia. And just for context, I do have a background in regulatory affairs. I'm not specifically a probiotic expert, so we rely on the experts that we know, including International Probiotics Association. So about complementary medicines and Complementary Medicines Australia, we are the peak industry body for the complementary medicines industry, including all stakeholders across the value chain. We work with other peak bodies to achieve the best outcomes, and we work with the International Probiotics Association on issues affecting the probiotics industry. We do an annual industry audit, and there's just a few figures here to help you get a sense of the Australian industry and how that works. In Australia, we have about 1/4 of our population who uses probiotics, both men and women, as you can see in this figure. And year on year, probiotics grew 6% in 2020. So they were one of the fastest growing ingredients or categories. And we do export a lot of complementary medicines, including probiotics. Australia remains the largest source of nutrition and health food imports to China, with an import volume of about $926 million US, right just ahead of the USA to China. About 70% of our exports go to China and Hong Kong, and to other Asian countries and Oceania and the Middle East. So probiotics regulation in Australia. We're a little bit different to other countries, I suppose, in that probiotics are not regulated as food supplements or dietary supplements. They are largely regulated as complementary medicines by the Therapeutic Goods Administration under the Therapeutic Goods Act 1989. So we've been regulated this way for about 30 years. Under the Therapeutic Goods Administration, complementary medicines include vitamins, minerals, and nutritional supplements, and microorganisms and their extracts, which includes probiotics, but also includes a broader range of substances, including prebiotics, killed microorganisms, and extracts of microorganisms. And so the microorganisms include bacteria, fungi, and algae. Complementary medicines also include traditional medicines, including traditional Chinese medicines, Australian Indigenous medicines, and others. And of course, some probiotics in Australia are still regulated as foods when they are in a typical food format, such as drinks, yogurt, kefir, etc. Probiotics and related substances as complementary medicines. So TGA does not have legislation specific to probiotics, except in the quality category. The TGA legislation classifies the following items that are relevant to the probiotic industry. Classified under complementary medicines. So a microorganism, whole or extracted, a sugar, polysaccharide or carbohydrate, it says plant or herbal materials, but under that they do include plant fibers for prebiotics, enzymes, algae, fungi, etc. So how are they regulated as medicines in Australia? So we have a register of therapeutic goods, And there's 3 ways to get probiotics as complementary medicines onto that register. The first way is the listed medicine pathway. The second way is the listed assessed medicine pathway. And the third is the registered medicine pathway, which has the highest level indications for the prevention, alleviation, cure, or management. I don't believe we currently have any probiotics currently as registered medicines in Australia, nor as listed assessed, that category there in the middle. The listed assessed category is useful because we can take existing probiotics and make slightly higher level claims. So we might be able to mention a serious disease, or the prevention, alleviation, or management of a non-serious condition. This is provided that product level evidence can be provided for the particular product that's being assessed. This is a new pathway. It's been around about 2 years. There have been some products through, but no probiotics as yet. An example of a claim that could be made is prevention of hay fever. However, this means the bulk of probiotics are all in the listed medicine category, which make the lower level indications for health maintenance, enhancement, or non-serious diseases or conditions. So, listed medicines are most probiotics. Listed medicines have pre-approved ingredients, so pre-approved probiotic organisms. They must comply with good manufacturing practice, and manufacturers in Australia need to comply with the PICS code of GMP. We do get some concessions being a lower risk medicine, but we do have very strict GMP requirements. And there are pre-approved therapeutic indications that are selected by the sponsor, and the TGA does not evaluate those before market because they are low risk and the substances are pre-approved. So the medicine is listed onto the register, and then the TGA can do post-market compliance activities, including examining whether they think the evidence to make those claims is sufficient. They can also examine whether they think the quality of the medicine is sufficient, and if they believe it isn't, then they can take action to remove those products from the market. They can and do this. So what kind of indications can be made for low-risk listed medicines in Australia? With scientific or traditional evidence, you can make claims such as helps enhance or promote gastrointestinal system mucosa health, helps maintain or support good or beneficial friendly gut flora during antibiotic use or after antibiotic use, help enhance or promote GIT mucosa health, help enhance, improve, promote or increase intestinal or good bacteria, beneficial or friendly bacteria growth, and help reduce the occurrence of symptoms of medically diagnosed irritable bowel syndrome. However, as mentioned, the TGA can do compliance reviews of listed probiotics, and in 2016, the TGA targeted vaginal probiotics for a compliance review of evidence, in particular, probiotics for oral use that had vaginal indications. And they stated on their website, there does not appear to be any evidence which demonstrates that any of the following probiotic organisms are effective for vaginal conditions when taken orally: Lactobacillus rhamnosus, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, or Lactobacillus acidophilus. So we saw many of these products either having to remove the claims about vaginal conditions or being removed from the market altogether. The TGA said they conducted a search of the publicly available literature, and they considered 26 papers, and issues they identified included poor study methods with sample sizes, high dropout rates, lack of compliance controls, inadequate reporting of study results, or that they didn't think that the dosage form in the studies was comparable to the commercially available probiotics. So a lot of these issues can come up after the product's already on the market, which can be a problem, but we are fortunate to be able to get them onto the market without their pre-market assessment. Several years ago, there was a new reform that provided that newly improved ingredients get 2 years exclusive use in listed medicines. This was introduced so companies could get to reap the return on investing into research and development to gain the TGA approval for the use of a new substance, including a probiotic or a substance derived from a probiotic. Before this, a company would go to all the effort to get the substance approved, but all the companies would benefit from one company's work from being able to access that substance. So this gives them a 2-year exclusive use period where they get to reap return on the investment and the time and the work that they've put into that substance. For example, on March 1, 2021 of this year, 2-fucosyllactose was approved. I have difficulty saying that one. And it comes with a condition that is only to be used in a medicine where the client who applied to have the ingredient included in the determination is the sponsor of the medicine or has given written authorization to the sponsor of the medicine to include the ingredient in there. And this paragraph is no longer a requirement after March 2023. But this has actually, while this is a positive thing for industry, it has caused issues where more than one company is seeking to have the same substance approved. And unfortunately, we haven't found a great way to deal with it. Currently, it's still first in, best dressed. In Australia, default standards are the required quality standards. So this includes the British Pharmacopoeia, the European Pharmacopoeia, or the United States Pharmacopoeia. This is because Australia does not have its own pharmacopoeia. Being a fairly young country, being colonised by Britain, everybody came over and continued on the use of the British Pharmacopoeia. It was only later that the European Pharmacopoeia and the United States Pharmacopoeia were adopted. That was only, I think, about 15 years ago. So we use these as our default standards, and in some cases we can override them with our own Australian-specific standards that are set by the government. For example, the quality of capsules, tablets and pills, we provide specific requirements, and for labels, so that it overrides the labelling requirements in those pharmacopoeias. So we have a standard for capsules, tablets and pills called the TGO 101, and that document does actually define probiotics as viable defined microorganisms in sufficient numbers to alter the microflora by implantation or colonisation in a compartment of the host. And this document provides assay limits for probiotics specifically, rather than microorganisms, as not less than the stated content. To date, the TGA has, I suppose, allowed some leeway in justifying errors when the specification is, when the product is assayed against the specification. And I suppose that issue is under consideration of, is there a margin of error allowed and how much should that be? It has been an issue that's tripped up some companies though, so it is something that we really want to get a good handle on. How can we approach this into the future? The monograph 3053, Live Biotherapeutic Organisms, as you would all be aware, was introduced in around 2018. Introduction of this monograph has caused issues for Australia, unfortunately, because it gets automatically adopted as the default standard, especially where there's no other standard in place. For example, if the USP don't have a standard for probiotics generally, which they don't. Now, the question has come up is, does the definition of live biotherapeutic organisms, does that apply to probiotics? Is it the same thing or is it different? And what's really interesting is, I think if you look at some definitions of live biotherapeutic organisms, it's not defined in the same way as probiotics. However, when you look at the actual monograph in the pharmacopoeia, the way that it's defined does not exclude probiotic supplements that are used in Australia. And because it doesn't exclude that in that definition within the monograph specifically, the TGA have taken it that the monograph 3053 does in fact apply to probiotics in Australia. Again, causing issues because it wasn't really designed for our market. It was designed more for the European market for higher risk probiotic medicines. So what do we do about this? And does this monograph actually require the enumeration of each strain in a multi-strain probiotic formula. For example, in the assay section, it says the number of microorganisms needs to be determined and the potency of each strain needs to be expressed. Now, we did seek clarification from the European Pharmacopoeia, and they believe that that is the correct interpretation, that each strain in a multi-strain formula needs to be determined. So again, that has caused problems. However, there is a small caveat in Australia, which is that TGA has traditionally allowed quantifying by input with justification. So quantifying by input means you put the organism in and you count it based on what you've put in combination with your stability data. It remains unclear to some extent where specific enumeration of every strain and where quantified by input will be accepted by the TGA. Quantified by input can be used still, according to the TGA, but they believe it needs to be appropriately justified with data. Now, we would agree with that, but I suppose the question is how much data and how robust does that data need to be? We are concerned that the kind of data that the TGA have perhaps been expecting is beyond expectations that can easily or reasonably be met in some or all cases. They've said, importantly, it's not just strain interaction that needs to be considered. It must also be substantiated that there is no change in content of each individual strain from the input to the final product, and I believe also end of shelf life, considering other factors that affect the content, such as the excipients, the processing, the container type, and the water type. These factors may also need to be considered in relation to stability if product-specific stability studies are not undertaken. So this is useful guidance. This is something that we sought from the TGA. It's not currently something that's in the public domain, but it does sort of reflect where, what kind of controls that they expect would be in place. But again, I suppose there's a discussion over whether does it need to be on every product, or can justifications be made based upon other data that's available and an explanation that's provided by the company, and at what point is that accepted or rejected? Considering all of these kind of decisions are happening in the post-market space, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking when companies go through this kind of questioning process with the TGA. So what are the future directions for probiotics in Australia and what is happening? Really, I think a decision needs to be made on monograph 3053 and its applicability to probiotic products quality in Australia. Do multi-strain products need to be enumerated? We are maintaining that essentially the typical approach should be continued, whereby you can do the plate count method and count species at the genus level until such time as more advanced technologies are available. The TGA were, I think, hoping that under monograph 3053 that the more advanced technologies were in common and regular use, but that's not actually the case. It's jumping a little bit too far ahead, and we've made that case and said, can we please pull it back and get there when we're ready, because we're not quite ready yet. So this does bring it back again to quantified by input. How do we answer those questions? How do we set those expectations? So TGA and CMA and a few other industry bodies in Australia have been looking at, do we create a guidance document? And really, what is the content of that guidance document? And is it appropriate? And is it achievable? There have been some difficult conversations going on there. Will this document go forward? We don't know. It's not currently confirmed. We will see. There will probably be an update by the end of the year. But we certainly are saying we really need to rely upon export probiotic organisations rather than, I think, trying to go it alone as a country or as a regulator or as an industry. We need to cooperate globally. We need to fit in with what is happening internationally. We need to work with the international bodies and with the international processes, because this is a very global industry and everything needs to be aligned. Australia has had wonderful support from the international community, and we really value that a huge amount. The other guidance document that may be coming forward is what is required when a new probiotic substance is allowed or approved for use in Australia. Currently, we haven't had any specific guidance to probiotics. We've only had guidance that's more generic for substances in general, but as we know, probiotics are quite unique and quite different to other substances. That consultation process that we've been going through with the TGA has also been very challenging with a lot of different viewpoints coming up. We have also worked with IPA to respond to that appropriately. Will that document be published? Will it go forward? We still don't know. We think perhaps in 2022 it will, but we want to make sure it's reviewed with a fine-tooth comb first. Labelling issues for probiotics are also under scrutiny. And I didn't make a slide on this particular topic, but we've also had questions about whether inert ingredients, excipients, need to be declared in Australia. Generally, that is the case, not necessarily the quantity, but the actual substance, if they're there as an ingredient in the product. If they're not there as an ingredient and they're in a trace amount, well, those discussions are going on about whether that actually needs to be reflected or not. And clearly for labelling, we also have got all the usual allergens that need to be declared, so milk products, soy products, fish products, all of them, wheat, you name it. So please, if you do supply into Australia, please make sure you declare all your allergens and your ingredients if you can. But we are continuing to work on all of these different topics in Australia with the TGA and with the help of IPA. So my name is Lucy, Complementary Medicines Australia. That is my email if you want to shoot through any questions. And thanks so much for your time.
Thank you to Lucy for that.